I'm going to go ahead and start the recording as well, Bob, so I don't forget for you.
Good for you.
And, okay. All right, you're officially the host.
All right. Well, hello, everybody, and it's awesome to be with you guys. What's it been, Natalie? About 5 or 6 weeks since we did a Wednesday morning group?
Yes, since you did accountability. I was going to say we're starting our 11th Northern Kentucky Accountability Group virtual meeting, which I've never surprised, but yes, about that time since you were there.
Yep. And so, Natalie, again, as everybody knows, is awesome. And we were talking, and one of the things that I felt like was kind of coming out was that people were getting kind of far along in the process. And then it seems like, Bob, I've been the finalist 2 times, 7 times, whatever. And it just seemed like kind of getting over the hump for some people was where they were getting stuck. And I've like, if you and I were just one-on-one networking, like I might be, sharing some ideas around like how to tell the stories better, but I never really kind of codified it. And so as Natalie and I were talking, I'm like, if you'd be up for it, it would make me have to write it. And, I think maybe it might be helpful for some people if they pick up hey, I just admitted somebody. Wow. Do I get a stripe? I just admitted.
Yes, you can do it.
Yeah. Anyway, what you guys can see, I haven't presented before per se, but, I feel like it's talking about one of my kids. I don't need a slide deck to talk about my kids, but, I hope you guys find this helpful. And, please use the chat. Natalie, you're going to be the moderator for Q&A stuff.
Yes.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen here.
I'm also going to ask everybody while Bob is speaking, if you don't mind, just to mute your mics if you could. And then Bob loves when you ask questions. So I'll just monitor the chat. And if you have a question, I'll go ahead and call on you.
Okay, so can you see my slide now, Natalie?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, awesome. So the title of this is The Stories You Tell. And the way that I've said this 1,000 times to people is, your resume might get you the interview, but the stories you tell will get you the job. And the genesis for that for me was just watching people grind so hard on their resume. Like the resume was this magic golden ticket. If they just got their resume perfect, that was sort of the missing ingredient. And, I think the resume is really important, and we'll talk about, an element or two in a few minutes. But, and I'm going to give a ton of credit right now to Matt Marvin and the Nailed It talk that he gave, Natalie, a few weeks ago.
Yes.
I thought it was fantastic. It was also encouraging to hear in different words, but some of the same concepts and same ideas, in his sort of version of telling this. But again, the resume can only get you so far. And so the other thing I want to say, just from an expectation setting perspective, is there's no pixie dust here. I don't have the magic answer to every hard question that somebody might ask you on another day. What this is about is proper preparation and getting your mind in a good place so that when you are interviewing and somebody does ask you a question, and maybe it's a question that nobody's asked you before, like, oh man, I'm not sure what to do with that, that it kind of gives you a place to center to. So you're like, oh, okay, I know what to do with this. Hadn't heard that before, but that's cool. I can work with this. But again, there's no pixie dust here. And I'll also say, this isn't designed to, again, kind of anticipate every question that you might get asked in an interview. So, and I'll even take it as good feedback. Like, hey, liked your examples, Bob, but really could have used an example on this common hard question and whatever. So that's fine. Again, this is sort of first run of presenting this content, so I welcome your feedback. So with that said, one of the things that's occurred to me, particularly with 40 million people, being furloughed or losing their jobs, is a lot of the content that I've written or I've presented before, with Natalie's group or other groups, it's kind of been like pieces of a puzzle, but I never provided the picture of the box, to show you exactly what the puzzle is supposed to look like. So it's kind of like, oh, that was a nice nugget here and that's a nice nugget there, but I'm not kind of seeing the whole picture. And so what I've done over the past few weeks is really kind of tried to put it in a bit more of a process that you can kind of understand. And so it's in 4 components. It starts with attitude, and then there's the message that you're communicating. There's the outreach and how to do outreach. And of course, that's gonna be like a lot of networking and things like that. And then there's interviewing, and I'm kind of debating on calling this closing the deal. But those are sort of the 4 kind of main components of how I would encourage you to think about this. I was sharing with Natalie a little while ago that initially I had the attitude piece, kind of before message, and it was very sequential. And I had done some interviews with people, and in fact, some alumni from Natalie's group. And one of the things that kind of came out was your attitude matters the whole time. It's like the keel or the ballast that kind of keeps you from tipping over if you think about a sailboat. And as you all know, there's more lows than highs, and you really need to have a good attitude. And there's a whole other thing we can talk about on attitude, but just suffice it to say, attitude matters the whole time. Then the second piece is getting your message right. And sometimes I see people get outreach before message. And the way I say that is that can be like airing a lot of bad commercials. Like if you don't have your message right, you could be really busy networking with people. And that's what people told me to do, right? I'm supposed to network. Yeah, but if what you're talking about doesn't make sense, or it's not compelling, or your attitude is not in a good place because you're still angry, you're still hurt, you're kind of in victim mode maybe, like you could be really busy reaching out to people and it's actually hurting you, not helping you. So kind of second step is getting the message right, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Then the third piece is the outreach. That is the networking, and that's sort of the selling part of this, and getting out and meeting people and telling your story. And then, if things go according to plan, either through your direct outreach to companies, which is the making your own weather thing, or it's through networking, or heaven forbid, it's through a job board or a recruiter. Once you're interviewing, that's really when it's prime time. And I really like what Matt was sharing to kind of reinforce, I think, a really important concept is he said sort of the magic standard that people are holding you to is, she's a great fit. She would be a great fit here. And so the idea, and what I kind of want to blend into that, is how you tell your stories are designed, and you can do some things very intentionally to control it, that make people walk away meeting with you in your interview like, wow, she's a great fit for us. She just checked all the boxes. And that's really kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. So what people are trying to do, and I shamelessly ripped this off from a guy I worked for a long time ago, and we were interviewing a candidate, and he says, Bob, what I'm just trying to figure out is, I know he's a chocolate bunny. I'm just trying to figure out if he's hollow or solid.
Hey, Bob, can I interrupt you for a second? I think there might be some people in the waiting room. If you can see that little box to admit them.
I don't. I see participants. Admit all.
Thank
all good?
You. All good. Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
I don't know how to make that go away.
Sorry to break your stride.
Okay. But what Chris was talking about is, okay, kind of ostensibly by resume, this person is an appropriate person we should be talking to. But I want to know if they're the real deal. Like, I mean, they say the right words and their resume looks appropriate, but the point of the interview is really to figure out, is this person the real deal or not? And the way that you communicate your accomplishments, the way that you communicate your interests, the way that your interpersonal skills are all going to ring hollow, or they're going to ring solid, depending on how well you're communicating. So that's just always stuck with me, is that person's trying to figure out if I'm hollow or solid. They know I'm a chocolate bunny, but which one am I? And so the reason that they even have a job opening and they're trying to hire you or somebody for that is they have a problem. There is some pain that they're feeling in their organization that needs to be solved. And the point of the job is, can you solve their pain? And what you're trying to figure out is what that is. Now, the good news is, it's just like in a hospital or with a doctor, that patient has a chart. A chart initially is the job description. They're telling you where it hurts, and they're telling you what they think help looks like to satisfy or make that pain go away. And this is really important. When I said kind of like getting, like if somebody asks you a question that might knock you off your balance a little bit, a very great kind of centering thing to get organized around is there's really three kinds of pain. And there are a million derivatives of these three, but there's sort of three main ones. They're either hoping this role that they're hiring you for helps them make more money, save money, or mitigate risk. Can I help them make money, save money, or mitigate risk? I don't care if you're a coder, the executive assistant to somebody, the head of sales, managing some element of a factory. All of these things, you're doing at least one of those. That's why they hired you. That's part of your value. And the goal, again, is to do a great job of researching what the probable pain is, bringing your expertise, because just like a doctor goes to med school, you've gone to school. It's a school of hard knocks. It's college. It's all of your experiences. You've been to school. You might have seen this kind of patient before, and your goal is to be able to communicate to them, you're the right doctor to solve their pain. So one of the things I think is really interesting in this is asking questions. Initially, I changed the visual here. Initially, I had like a classroom and, hey, can I ask a question? Can I ask a question? But I'm not sure that's how people feel sometimes when they're being interviewed. I think that there's a loss of control that people feel, and they feel more like the person sitting in that chair being interrogated, and they're being very reactive to what's being asked of them. And we want to please the person, and we want them to like us. And so I've seen people, and and I'm sure a lot of people on this call have both conducted and experienced interviews, and you know what it's like when that person feels like they're being interrogated or they're willing to be interrogated. The idea is to ask questions and to have a balance and a sharing of information. And we're not waiting till the very end of the interview and it's like, so Bob, do you have any questions for me? Yeah, like how many vacation days do we get? And what's your favorite thing about working here? I mean, those are fine questions, but there's like a lot better questions. For example, asking people, tell me about this role, and from your perspective, what would like the number one contribution be that this role could make? If it's a new role, like they're adding a role here, it's like, what are you guys really hoping that by adding this, it's going to free other people up to do, or the direct contribution here, right? How would you guys measure success in this role? If we were doing my job review in a year and I killed it, it was great, what would we be talking about? What would those elements be? If it's a replacement role, it can be things like, well, what do you think's gone well? What do you think could be improved? Could you guys like quantify like, what the cost to not getting this solved is over the next 3 months or whatever? People will answer your questions. And what they're doing is they're giving you context, they're giving you more information, they're giving you back to our doctor, they're telling you more of their symptoms, but they're also telling you what the kind of price of not solving for those problems is to them and to their company. So really, really important. It's going to give you some very important information that as we come back and start telling our stories are going to just give a lot more context and make you much more on point in how you tell the story. So this is, I stole this from myself, as it turns out. This is from an article I wrote on LinkedIn called Adjectives Are Not Accomplishments. And this is from the model from Laszlo Bock. If you guys have heard me talk about this before, the XYZ. And what I tried to do was give you guys some examples of key accomplishments. I said earlier, that, the resume is not the be all end all, which I still believe that's true. However, what it can definitely serve as is the discussion guide for the conversation you want to have. What I mean by that is everybody's been in the meeting where I'm looking for, this will be my fake resume for a minute. And it's like, Bob, your 1 o'clock interview's here. And you're like, oh crap, I forgot. And, haven't really read this lady's resume yet. And all of a sudden, it's like, just a very traditional resume with a lot of words and it's in chronological order. It's got a lot of bullets. And I'm just like, oh, and the summary section's 120 words. It's like, yeah, I'm like kind of starting off with not a lot of information here if I'm the interviewer. And I've been that person before. I mean, everybody's probably been that person at some time where you just, or maybe you had a stack of 27 resumes for the 13 interviews you're doing today. You don't remember everybody's resume. The advice here, and what I mean by the discussion guide for the conversation you want to have, is I would have very high up on my resume, key accomplishments, 4 or 5 bullets that irrespective of when they happened in your career, it's essentially your greatest hits. And I would even have them in descending order. So like, if they only ask me about one of these, I want it to be the first one. Because if we end up having a great conversation and we don't get to the other 4, I want them to ask me that first one. So you're kind of leading the witness that this is what I want to talk about. Now you'll notice a couple other things here. One is, in every case, there's some number. There's something quantified. Remember what we said, like the pain that they're having is somewhere related around make money, save money, or mitigate risk. So all of these are capturing the basic idea of I moved the needle at the company. The work that I was involved with, had a measurable result. It's really important. It doesn't always have to be in dollars. I know every one of these is, and you guys could have a lot of legitimate either roles that you've had or situations where it just wasn't that quantifiable. It's okay, but your goal is to get it to be quantifiable. Second thing I've done, yep.
One question, Vathana Lee asked, if you can't recall the numbers, how can they be quantified?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sort of maybe 3 things to think about in that. It depends on your role. One is talking to former colleagues that you might have worked on that project with. My memory's terrible. I would make the world's worst witness. And so if I call, my wife has a great memory. She's the classic wife of, you remember you were wearing your green shirt and you hadn't shaved for a day and we had spaghetti that night, and she remembers everything. I'm like, how do you remember all that stuff? Find somebody that worked on the project with you. They might be able to provide it a little bit more color to it. If you're in a role where you had an external client, you can reach out to them and say, Susan, I remember that we had, done that XYZ project with you guys. And, I'm like working on my resume right now. And I was really proud of the work that we did there. But what I'm not sure I ever really knew was like, what impact did that end up having for you guys? And people will tell you, I mean, if they can, they'll tell you. And then the third thing, and I always have to be very careful how I say this because I want you to hear me properly. This is all in the highest integrity way. This is not making stuff up. But was it $100, $1,000, $1 million, $10 million, $100 million? I mean, order of magnitude, where are we? And I mean, if it was $6 or $7 million, okay. And this is what I mean, like in the integrity thing, and please hear me. Nobody's going to audit you on this exactly, right? So it's not like, oh, I was off by, a decimal point, or not decimal, but, a minor amount. If you don't know, at least set a range, try and do the best that you can do. Don't lie. Don't even kind of lie. I'm not suggesting that, but somewhere somebody should be able to at least put it in some kind of a box. And if you can't, do the best you can.
Bob, I think you just answered a question from Lynn Luberst. Lynn, you can unmute. Does that answer your question, what Bob just said?
Pretty close. I'm always concerned about, I might know most of the number, but I don't use most, other parts of it on a regular basis, and trying to get percentages of growth and that kind of stuff. Some of the components of the math are things I don't have.
Yep.
So okay. When I'm saying fudge it, that's kind of what I mean, is that I don't want to lie, but I have a general idea.
And I think it's that general idea. And again, this is all in high integrity mode. So, approximately, 10 to 20%. Mm-hmm. Okay. But we're not saying it was 320%.
Yeah.
Right.
The challenge is some of them were long enough ago that to ask people that I still know that work there, recreating it would even be a challenge for them. So.
Yeah. Well, okay. Now, help me with this, but I might potentially challenge somebody that, is that worthy then of being on your greatest hits list? If it was fairly long ago and I can't quantify it, like, is that like really an amazing story? Maybe, so.
Most of, they are. There were some great projects.
Fair enough.
Sure. Yeah.
Fair enough. So what I also tried to do here is, because I'm in sales, I live in a black and white world. Like, you made your number, you didn't make your number. I know exactly what my number is, and it's, definitely lends itself to quantification. But I tried to think of some other, functional areas within a company, up to and including, and this is that last bullet on like I was an administrative assistant. This is what the guy did. He actually did reduce the cost by $47. It was a $13,000 savings. Even though the number isn't like, oh my gosh, it's like, he's thinking about it in terms of, I saved the company some money, and that's part of my job, is to make a contribution. So think about, another way that you can think about these is when you're asked a question, it's, Kevin, that's a great question. I think it's the second bullet there, under key accomplishments on my resume, where we're talking about, increasing cash flow by 5%. And then you tell the story, but you brought them back to your resume and this key accomplishment. And just in case you didn't get all the details in your story, it's right there in black and white for them. So again, ways of thinking about using your resume to your advantage. It's kind of like a package. If I go to the store and I'm buying toothpaste, that marketer is telling me what she wants me to know about that toothpaste, whether it's for your oral health, whiter teeth, sensitive gums. They're highlighting for me, and that's where you should be using the bolding, is tell me what you want me to pay attention to here. So
Bob, we have one more question for you as well from Mindy Ofterheide. On a sales standpoint, when coming from a small company, numbers may not be as impressive when compared to enterprise companies. Any recommendations outside of percentages on ways to better represent the big picture?
Yeah, and I'm thinking about this on the fly, but if at your company a $75,000 sale was the biggest sale of the year, it was the third biggest sale in company history, that's a big deal. In that world, it was twice the average sale that we typically see. Whatever the dimensions are that that's fine that it wasn't, $7.5 million, it was $75,000. But if the average ticket was $25,000 and you sold it for 75, and I mean this very sincerely, I would be impressed. I'd want to understand, back to Chocolate Bunny, how'd you do it? I want to know that there was a real there, and you're not just sort of spouting off a number. Because and we'll get to this here in just a second, maybe, can I segue, Natalie? Because it
Sure.
can be something here. It's how you frame the story. And so I'm sure y'all have seen CAR, PAR, STAR, SOAR, and there's probably a bazillion others. I love these frameworks. I wish more people used these frameworks. When I ask somebody, tell me about a time when you, and it's like, oh my gosh, yes, no. So this client was in Milwaukee and my flight was canceled and we got in at 2 a.m. and I had the stomach flu. I was miserable. Like, I don't care. I mean, meaning no offense, but that's not what I'm trying to learn. That's maybe how I remember the story because that's how I lived it. But in an interview scenario, that's not how I want to hear your story. Because what I'm trying to do, back to being a doctor, is I'm trying to map your skills to my pain. And that's really kind of what I'm trying to figure out. And so I know that even the way that I'm kind of articulating STAR here might be a little bit different than the way some people have seen it. I think it's more commonly situation, tasks, action, result. But I kind of use thinking, because at the end of the day, if I hire you, I'm buying your brain. I'm buying your ability to think. That's what I really care about. And so, when you're telling that story, what's great about these models is it will keep you concise, it will keep you on point, and it'll allow you to shape the story to be as relevant as possible. And that's what sells, is relevance, right? And so, I'm going to give you guys some examples in a couple of minutes of like what this might look like, and then I'm assuming people have mostly written stories, for themselves and kind of their successes and accomplishments. But telling a story this way is the most powerful way to tell the story. But then there's a little bit of a hook to it too. So I would encourage you to have a repertoire of maybe like 5, 7 stories. I don't know what the exact magic number is. What I am trying to say, though, is that you don't need 100 stories for every, again, possible scenario. It's impossible to do. You can't do it. What you need are stories that can be repurposed. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But you should be thinking about stories that highlight different elements of what you bring to the party. If you remember, like, bake a cake, it was, like, what are some skills that you have? What are stories that highlight some of my key skills? What are stories that highlight some of my key personality attributes, like curiosity, tenacity, goal orientation, whatever. And then also maybe things around your passion, your interests, things that motivate you. But you need a quiver of stories. The reason, though, that you don't need 1,000 stories for 1,000 questions is because you're going to remix them. And what I mean by this is it's going to be the same story, just told slightly differently. In the same way that you can take a song where the melody is essentially the same, but it's been remixed. And it's got a country flavor to it because of the instruments they play, how they mix it, or it's got a hip hop flavor to it, it's got a bunch of bass to it, and how they play that song. Remixing is all about tailoring the story to your audience, right? I would not tell a hip hop story to my wife because she likes country music, right? And so I've got to be sensitive. This is a very hard part for me, candidly, in sort of sharing content like this with you guys, because it requires a level of fluidity and to be in the moment and to be able to read the situation based on the function that you're talking to, the personality that you can tell the person that you're talking to, what you understand their problems to be and what they're solving for and what they hope this role does. But an easy example would just be based on the function of the person that you're talking to. If I'm talking to the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of a company, he or she's probably going to be pretty interested in stories that emphasize profitability, cash flow, things like that. If I'm telling the story to the Chief Revenue Officer or the VP of Sales, that person's going to be pretty interested in hitting your number, because that's all the head of sales cares about, is making their number. If I'm telling that story to the person that would be my direct manager, I might be making sure that I'm highlighting collaboration, teamwork, on time, under budget, the kinds of things that are going to make them look good, because they've got people that do that. If I'm interviewing, and maybe you guys have had this situation where you're actually interviewing with people that would be reporting to you, which is a little weird, but it's happened to me, and I'm sure it's happened to other people. In that case, again, I'm going to want to talk a lot about teamwork. Probably want to make sure that I can demonstrate that I've got whatever the functional area is, technical chops, right? That you can respect my work because I know what I'm doing. I would probably be talking a lot about respect, and again, teamwork and things that, like, that's the kind of person I'd love to work for. This guy knows what he's doing, seems like a good egg. And I really like, some of his things around, integrity and passion and stuff like that. Wow, I think he might be a really good fit on our team. So the other way to think about remixing is, the behavioral questions. Tell me about a time, Bob, like a failure, something that just didn't go according to plan. Or tell me about a time when, you really had a big obstacle to overcome. Tell me about a time when you had to deal with a very difficult client, right? All those sort of questions. All right, I can take the same success story and remix it to emphasize different elements or kind of an aspect of that story that is germane to answering that question really well. So, time out, Natalie, are we good on questions and stuff?
I think so. I think there were a couple here, but I think they were kind of being answered as you read along. So I think we're good. If anybody wants to interject, though, you can feel free to unmute if you want to ask Bob something specific, like Mark Leonard. Not everyone has their name attached to their questions. So any questions right now? Haven't heard any. I think we're good, Bob.
Okay.
Is it possible for him to look at the joining people?
Oh, Bob, do you see anybody else out there to be admitted?
I just did. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
How do we mute?
I don't know. Somebody, there we go.
Thank you.
Somebody just had to mute. Okay.
Right. So again, just to kind of recap, you're trying to identify the problem that they're solving for. What's their pain? That's the doctor part. Ask questions, be engaged. That even the way that I'm talking about telling stories, which is giving information, even how you solicit information tells me a lot about, wow, that was a great question. She is figuring out exactly, she understands the problem. The way she's asking the question tells me she understands the problem. And I have a lot of respect for people who ask great questions. Then it's being prepared. It's having those stories in your resume. It's having those stories, in your mind. One of the things on attitude, I told you guys at the beginning that attitude kind of permeates everything. Remember, Natalie, Matt was talking about nerves and people feeling nervous and kind of off balance. And again, people, you pick up on when somebody's nervous, people pick up when we're nervous. And when I know my stories and I've got a lot of confidence in my stories, that comes through. And you guys, if you've heard me talk before, you know, I talk about convictions, clarity, confidence, and contagious. When we have those quiver of stories and we know them, they're not made up, it's not BS, and really kind of thought through that story from multiple angles and can tell it from multiple angles because we've anticipated the need to tell it from multiple angles, your anxiety level is going to go way down. Your confidence is going to go way up. And, you know, the way that I say it is, you know, confidence is contagious. When you believe, you make me believe. And when you tell that story, not in a braggy, you know, overly obnoxious way, but just in a, this is real, I'm telling you, you know, and I'm very proud of this story. It makes me believe, and now I think you are a solid bunny, not a hollow bunny, because I've been poking at you and I've been asking you questions, and every time you keep delivering because you know your story. And so what we're going to look at now is a little bit of remixing with some examples. So Natalie, here's the technology jump, and wish me well. I hope I make it.
Okay. Okay.
All right. So,
Bob,
yep.
can you repeat those C's that you just mentioned? There are about 4 or 5 of them. Like conviction.
Oh, yeah. It's in an article on LinkedIn, if it's helpful to you, called One Reason Your Networking May Not Be Working. But it was conviction, clarity, confidence, and contagious. And just real quickly, it's like it's having convictions. Like, I'm not everything to everybody. I know this is true about me. I know this is true about my skills. I know this is true about my personality. I know this is true about what I care about. Importantly, I know this is true about what I want to do and how I want to contribute in my next role. To your point earlier at the beginning, Natalie, whether it's a new job or the promotion that I'm going for, like, I know this is what I want. And so when we've got conviction about these things, it also says that, you know, there's some other things I'm maybe not as passionate about or don't care as much about, or it's just, honestly, that's not my skill set or my lane. And so, you know, it takes courage, and depending on where you are in your job search, to say, but that's not a fit for me. I'm going to call that's not a fit for me. It gives you clarity. And so back in messaging, and I told you, you know, like airing bad commercials, a bad commercial is, you know, so tell me about yourself. Well, I've done HR and sales operations, and I've got some financial services experience. And it's just like, Bob, stop me when you hear something that you like. I call that catalog selling. You know, you're just flipping every page in the catalog, hoping that, you know, oh, that's what I wanted. You said the right word. You know, that's not how it works. When you say all those things that you don't have conviction about, the absence of clarity is confusion. And that confuses me. And now, like, I don't know what to believe. But when you're clear, then it's like, oh, okay. And then when you're communicating, it's like, you really believe this. It's grounded in convictions. You know your story. And then when you're communicating it, you can do it with a great deal of confidence. And like I say, the beauty of confidence is it's contagious. You know, I believe you. And that's, you know, really a big hurdle in an interview is, do I actually believe this person? So what I've done here, this is a live job posting on my company's website. I say my company I work at, website. And it's for an enterprise sales director role for retail. And you can see there's like a lot of words on here. There's a lot of stuff they're looking for. And there's a lot of bullets. I don't know how many bullets, right? I think 30 bullets or something. But what I said earlier, right, was this is sort of like the patient's chart. The patient is reporting all these symptoms. And so what I did was I thought about, well, what are different, let me sort of figure out what they're telling me are their most important symptoms. So this is the same job rec, but now what I've done is I've highlighted everywhere it says retail or consumer. This is the vertical expertise that they're looking for. And they keep saying retail, retailer, retail, largest retailers. Consumer products and retailers, retail and consumer products in retail. Guess what's important to them? Somebody that gets retail and consumer products. I'm going to have a story spun up that speaks to, I get retail, I get consumer products. Okay? However, that's not the only thing they say they want. So, same job rec. But this time, what I highlighted was identification of C-level and other senior level key decision makers and influencers, multiple levels, C-level, engage senior level executives in strategic meetings and top-down alignment, stakeholder management, right? They've just given me a whole other set of clues that I can go shape my story around because I know this is really important to them. I would be a complete dunderhead if I had a story that included like a lot of success selling high up in a company and I didn't tell it, even when they gave me the script. Here's another one. I mean, I promise you, I put this together at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Looking at this, I'm like, this stuff just started popping off the page. And I'm like, they're telling me the story. Here's where they want to know that you actually get the business and these different elements of the business. Advertising, marketing, pricing, consumer insights, each buying center, that's what these things are. Multiple levels, all key focus areas in the organization. Well, look, there's marketing, advertising, blah, 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 all over again. And then stakeholder management is the people that own these functions. Last one, and I'll move on. They want somebody who actually knows how to sell. Driving revenue growth, winning account strategies. Here's what oh my goodness, if I am going to tell a story, they are telling me what a strategy is supposed to include. I'm going to tell them a story about how I developed an account strategy that did all these things. I know how to generate leads. I know how to prospect. I know how to lead a complete sales cycle. I know how to do new business. I know how to use the software that salespeople use. I do. Okay, this is a key one. Understanding the sales process. There's as many sales processes as there are religions, and I better be able to say which one's mine, right? Or if I'm really smart, I'm going to find out which one is theirs and be able to speak to it. Negotiating skills, that's a sales skill, proven record. Isn't this funny? In the entire thing, and this is for a sales job, there's only one bullet that talks about results. So you guys get kind of the picture of like how you can take this job description. This doesn't count any networking that I've done and talking to people who work at the company or people who used to work at the company, you know, their website, if it's a public company, reading, you know, what management is saying is important to them. I mean, there are so many other Twitter. I mean, there's a bazillion sources that you could use to understand what they want and what's important to them, their buzzwords, the technology that they use, you know, how they think about growing their business. I mean, there's so many things available to us, but if all you had was the job posting, this is pretty rich to help me, you know, be prepared. If I'm prepared and I come in and I've got my retailer, C-level, different functions at the company, and I know how to sell, I am walking into this interview really confident because I know they're going to ask me about this stuff. So what I did was I put together one of my star stories, right? So situation, the thought process, the action, and the result. And so, you know, client is Target, one of the largest retailers. Historically, they've been our biggest client company with $1 million, do our account management turnover, plus a change at the key stakeholder of the client. And we were now speaking with a fairly junior level salesperson, which left us quite vulnerable. Our contact did not have the internal credibility or the standing to fight for budget. So when it came time to find cost savings, we got cut. What was my thought process? Oh crap. That's a problem. But what I had to figure out, what we had to figure out is how do we get much higher in the organization with a value proposition that justifies the previous spend level? So by reading earnings calls transcripts, we learned that Wall Street was asking questions about their pricing strategy, and especially how they performed poorly during the key holiday season because they had a poor promotional strategy. And they came in a distant fifth behind these other retailers. Given the size of those categories and the importance of holiday at a retailer, as everybody knows, we estimate that cost them about $250 million in lost sales. So what did we do? Well, we could see on the earnings call transcripts who the analysts were who covered Target. We tailored emails to each of them, offering them free access to our data that spelled out in more detail exactly how it was Target was beaten based on the categories, brands, and depth of discount of what they promoted last Christmas. One analyst immediately called us back and we provided her with access to the data the next day. She wrote a report on Target and using our data as kind of her key proof point for why she was lowering her price of the stock. And for context, and you have to understand how big Target is, their market capitalization is almost $60 billion. A 1% drop in their stock price is worth $590 million. So that same afternoon that her report was published, we reached out to the CFO, Chief Marketing Officer, and the Head of Investor Relations and asked if they'd seen the report. Long story short, we got a renewal back, we got a 5% increase because we were able to show a clear ROI. Now, all of that is a nice story. I can remix this story now, depending on who I'm talking to, that if I was talking to the CFO of Numerator, man, she loves getting a 5% increase, right? She wants multi-year contracts. That's what she wants. Awesome, I can talk about that. If I had to talk about, hey, Bob, do you understand retail and do you understand marketing and pricing and all those things? Yeah, that's exactly what we did. And I would give them chapter and verse on how we demonstrated that how they missed Target. They missed in electronics, they missed in toys, they had the wrong brands, their price points are 12% below what they should have been, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I can demonstrate all that stuff. If I wanted to talk about, Bob, tell me about one of your biggest failures. Okay, well, I kind of maybe characterize it as a failure and a lesson learned, but our biggest account dropped us. They paid us $1 million a year and they dropped us. And I believe, you know, a big part of my failing in that was not having high enough relationships at that account and being very dependent on one person to make the world go around for us. And when that person left, our contract left. That was a big problem. And I take ownership for that. You know, having said that, it's also a lesson learned. And then I would go and tell my story, right? And how we got higher up in the organization. If I needed to tell a win story, I could use this. If I had to tell a big obstacle story, if I'm making claims that I'm creative, okay, creative's easy to claim, hard to prove. What did you do that was creative? Earnings call, went to Wall Street, got this lady's attention, convinced her to publish our data. It's like, wow, that's pretty cool, maybe. Does that make sense? Like how this story is getting remixed, repackaged. It's the same song. I'm just telling it a different way, depending on what I'm being asked and who I'm talking to. Ms. Moderator?
Yes, I'm right here. I'm just typing. Everybody wants your star story, Bob. So, but I'm going to see it should appear in the recording pretty well, I think.
Okay, yeah, I can make this available to you.
Yes. Okay. That's great.
We can kind of go in two directions right now. I've got another example of a star story, or we can do Q&A, you know, whatever people want to do.
I think another star story would be good, but David asked if you could translate this into a cover letter, and I was going to say absolutely. We don't even, I know you're from Chicago, in our neck of the woods, we've moved from calling cover letters to calling them pain letters, to kind of describing exactly what Bob is doing here. And when Bob has talked before, we've had multiple people kind of use this technique, where if you have a job opportunity, well, even if you don't have a job opportunity, let's look at that situation, but there is someone you want to work with. I'll use the example of Dr. Ariane Austin, who was, she was a high-ranking Christ Hospital manager here, a former pharmacist, and for personal reasons wanted to move back to Cleveland, where the Cleveland Clinic is based. She studied what was going on in that market, in that hospital, and knew that the opioid crisis and medical marijuana were huge issues. She wrote what I would call a pain letter to the head of the Department of Pharmacology at the Cleveland Clinic, talking about her background and explaining how she had great experience in dealing with the opioids and with medical marijuana, and they reached out and called her. So she identified the pain ahead of time and then talked about what in her background would resolve that and put it in letter form.
Can I talk about that for a minute, Natalie?
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
What you just described is the guts of making your own weather.
Yes.
That's what that article is exactly about, because it's about being a salesperson, right? And, you know, what salespeople do is they call on companies that haven't called them already. And they're like, hi, you don't know me, but you should. And I understand at some level, based on the research that I have done, that you guys have this problem. Good news is I'm good at solving that problem. And then it's proof, 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 and then asking for the meeting. And I think I love calling it a pain letter. I think that is kind of in keeping with our theme here. And it's, again, it's remixing, it's repackaging this content into a different format. So rather than me telling a story in an interview context, I'm presenting my, not just, here's my resume, you know, please give me a call back. It's like, I'm already trying to solve a problem for you because I understand the problem. So yeah, I love that idea of calling it a pain letter and not a cover letter, but it's a very appropriate use of the same kind of greatest hits story remixed for a different medium.
Right. You also just hit something on something that came up earlier in the chat. Then Keeling, who's been looking for a little while, made a point of saying all of us in transition, and job transition is what he meant, are actually in sales and marketing. What Ben meant was we're all in sales and marketing for ourselves, whether that's actually our profession, but it doesn't matter what our job is, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, an Indian chief. If you're looking for a job, you are selling yourself and marketing yourself, but not everybody gets that right away. So Greg Lang responded, not everyone, he's an engineer. And Afishal said, I'm a chef. So it takes a while to get that understanding, but it's exactly what you were just describing. That we all
Natalie, do you know the book called To Sell Is Human by Dan Pink?
Yes.
And that's the exact point. As a parent, I'm selling my kid on doing what I want my kid to do. If I'm a doctor and I'm trying to sell you on taking your medication or, you know, practicing whatever lifestyle thing that you're supposed to be doing. If I am a project manager at my company and I'm trying to get another $10,000 of budget, I'm selling. Everybody's selling all the time, right? And, you know, thank you for who said, you know, because I say this all the time, this is a big sales and marketing exercise. And I think the reason that I like doing this is that's what I know a little bit about is sales and marketing. And it's sort of translating those principles into a job search.
Great.
I'm remixing the stuff I know how to do into the context of a job search because it works.
Mm-hmm.
And most people aren't sales and marketing people, so why would they know this? I was the director of accounting at Cintas. Why would I know any of this? You shouldn't, you know, but the good news is you've got great resources like Natalie who can help bring, you know, those things together. So tell me what you want to do next. More questions, or do you want to look at another story?
I do have one question, Bob.
Please.
I really liked your idea of trying to ask questions of the interview team so that we can tailor our responses. But I have yet to be in an interview where I am allowed to ask questions up front. It's always at the end. do you have a suggestion on how we can ask those questions?
Yeah. So there's a communication technique called reversing, and use this judiciously, but it's basically answering a question with a question. So essentially what you say is, "That's an interesting question, Judy. What's behind that? Can you help me understand?" Or, and again, you got to be smart about how you do stuff like this. I do this a lot when I'm generally not totally sure what we're talking about in a conversation, which is a place I do not like to find myself, is to be able to say, well, people use that term to mean different things. Can you just give me a little more context of how you mean that? And then, they'll talk for 5 minutes on what they mean by that. And now you understand, and you just got a bunch more information. If it's a straightforward question, I would give a straightforward answer. You can also do that's a great question, Anne. Just so I'm clear though, can you give me a little bit of context around, do you mean more operationally or more technologically? And let her give you a bunch more information. So back to, there's no pixie dust, but there are ways of getting people to clarify their question for you. And oftentimes what you'll find is when they're clarifying it, they'll basically give the answer they were looking for, and then you can speak to it. The other thing that I would say, and I'm very excited for you guys to get to hear a friend of mine later this summer, Kevin Williams, talk. And what I learned from him, and I hope you glean, is using the previous interviews to inform the next interview, and the previous interview to inform the next interview, and so that you're accumulating information as you go. So it may not be like, hey, I've got 1,000 questions I want to ask you guys before you ask me anything. Probably not going to get away with that, but you can be learning things as you go. You can be learning vocabulary. You can be learning all kinds of things that, again, kind of help arm you so that going into the next interview, you sound smarter than you did in the last interview, because you are. You've got more information now.
Hey, Bob, I've got a question. Matt was highlighting that about framing these questions to your own skills. Are you a big proponent of that too? And generally, when you're actually in the interview, are you framing like what Matt suggested too, and then going into the question?
Yeah, so I was taking copious notes when Matt was speaking. I've completely ripped off, with attribution, his whole framing it up thing in terms of tell me about yourself, right? I mean, because that was such a great thing that he gave. I think that is, candidly, it's just another way of remixing some of the same content, right? Because what I kind of gleaned from Matt in framing it up is, taking like a quality of yours. And I think in the example he gave, like the lady went to Indiana University or whatever, and then he bridged to a key accomplishment. Sounds like a star story to me. And then he kind of, the third leg on that stool, if I remember correctly, was then kind of tying it to the role there, and why she wanted to work there, thought she was a good fit for that, or how that tied to something that they were looking for. So again, this is sort of picking these elements and then being able to figure out, and again, not figure out, because I think you can be prepared of how to communicate your story. So an attribute, an accomplishment, and what you're looking for. And not what you're looking for, like, I'm looking for a company that will give me free education, and a company that's going to do all these things for me. I'm looking for a company who's looking for somebody who wants to work on stuff that matters, that wants to be part of something that is growing, and wants to take be on a team, but also take personal responsibility, because that's important to me. You know, and so you're sort of channeling, you know, your qualities and what you're looking for in your next role, but you're doing it in a way that is oriented towards how you're going to contribute at your next employer. Not what I'm going to get, it's what I'm going to give. And that was key to his message, if I remember correctly.
Very much so.
What else?
Any other?
Do you want to look at another story, or do you have a question?
I'm not seeing any other questions or hearing anyway, so maybe one last story and then.
Yeah, and then we can wrap it up. How about that?
Okay.
So, different situation. So, New York region for this financial services firm catering to manufacturers was historically the largest and highest performing region in the company, accounting for about 25% of the company's revenues. Their clients were apparel manufacturers who sold to all classes of retail, from high-end department stores to closeout stores. Strong market conditions the region had enjoyed masked several years of weak management. When the market invariably turned, the team was exposed to be the guys who played golf 3 times a week and a couple of junior folks who hadn't been trained properly. And I was brought in to turn around that situation. What was my thought process? Well, a couple things. One is I'd have to quickly determine who should be there, who wanted to be there, and how many new hires, if any, we might need. Moreover, the profile for the ideal salesperson had changed to someone who's more consultative than the previous hard sell methodology. And then lastly, we needed to triage our biggest clients and make sure they were secured for renewal so that our new business efforts were actually incremental to growth, not just replacing lost business. So what did I do? First day was setting expectations around integrity, hard work, and collaboration. Next 2 weeks was going through client lists, prioritizing based on size and risk. Next 30 days was meeting the top 20 clients on that list with the salesperson. And what that allowed me was to have the opportunity to see who could really sell, who wanted to be there, and who needed to find a job somewhere else. The result was, out of the 12 reps I inherited, 8 were actually quite good. They were just disgusted with the previous manager. My willingness to work closely with them, to use my relationship back at the home office to get stuff done, and hiring 2 hotshots and 2 strong players totally reset the tone and the culture for the office. We were able to reestablish trust, and that turned out to be the missing ingredient to the whole situation. We went from worst to first with a 31% increase over the prior year and the highest renewal rate in the company at 92%. And importantly, our profitability also rose 9%, underscoring the fact that the business we wrote was profitable. I can tell that story 7 different ways, right? And again, kind of, starting with my friend, the CFO. I mean, he's going to love hearing about renewal rates because that's, recurring revenue. That's gold. Profitability, that I'm not just out selling crappy business, that the company loses money on. So that's cool. Bob, tell me about working with challenging people. Tell me about working with just a tough team, a tough group of folks. Well, when I moved up to New Jersey from Birmingham, people thought I was stupid because I'd moved up from Alabama. Like I was just a dumb person. Anybody who comes from south of the Mason-Dixon line, by definition, is stupid. And one of the things that I had to tell them was, don't confuse nice with dumb, and don't confuse nice with weak, because they're not the same qualities, right? But also, I'm not just trying to command respect. I want to work with you guys. Tell me what your problems are. Like, let's go work on your biggest accounts together. I will help you. And what that did was, over time, reestablish trust. Okay, I just told the same story a different way. Like if I had to talk about retail back on my numerator thing, I can talk about retail. I could talk about sales process. I can talk about getting different functions in a company. So if I was applying for another company who worked in a similar industry, that becomes my pain letter. So I hope that, like, giving you guys some examples of a couple of star stories, and then being flexible in your mind of how they can be repositioned. And this is where preparation, using the job posting married with your quiver of stories, and then figuring out the remix and being prepared. Again, it's not pixie dust. Nobody's promising pixie dust, but I promise you, your success rate is going to go way up. You know, one of the biggest things that I do when I'm talking with, doing this one-on-one networking, and somebody's like, like, Bob, seriously, I've been like the finalist 3 times. And I'm like, I want to tell me your stories. So tell me about like a really good success. And it's flat. And it's sad to me because it's actually a very strong person, just not telling the story in a very compelling way, in a way that makes me go, this lady's awesome. Or even when forget interviewing, this is so true, and I think you guys know this, but when you're networking with people you don't know, you're interviewing. Why? Because if you want me to put my good name on a referral and recommend you to somebody else, and I've had this before, a friend of mine who I have very high regard for, I referred somebody to, and he called me up afterwards. He's like, Bob, why did you send this guy to me? He was like not very good. Like essentially, Bob, why did you waste my time? Don't do that. Guess what? I got highly sensitized to who I send to him. And those networking meetings or interviews that say, am I actually comfortable introducing this person to David? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. So, these stories, I mean, they just permeate the entire job search process. And that's why, after getting your attitude manageable, the message is everything. Then when you're doing your outreach, it's going to be so much more efficient and so much more effective to get you to the interview. And then for the company to say, wow, that lady is a great fit here. So
Great.
Natalie, I can keep repeating myself, but that's kind of what I got for you.
Okay, great. How about we have some other questions, Bob, if it's okay. Do you want to stop sharing your screen and go to gallery view?
Sure.
And then people can see each other. So that might be good.
Fine.
Okay. That's great. Okay. Ben Keeling, you had a question. Why don't you go ahead and speak up for Bob? We just have to unmute Ben.
Is it advisable to use the same star story more than once in an interview versus going to a different story that would hopefully illustrate the point that you really would have preferred to use that first star story for, but you already used that story, so I'm afraid on the risk of getting into a rut where they say, well, can you give me an example that doesn't involve that story?
Yeah. I mean, ideally, you've got more than one story that you could figure out how to remix. And, again, depending on the rapport that you're establishing with the person that you're speaking with, maybe you could say, Ian, I know we talked about Target, but there's actually an element to that Target story that I think is highly relevant to what you just asked me. And, it's this. You might do that. You might go and just think to yourself, well, that other story, the first story I told is probably 15 or 20% better than the story I'm getting ready to tell, but I'm going to tell this second story well too. And it clears the hurdle. May not clear by as much, but it clears the hurdle. So I don't know if I've got a perfect answer for you, Ben. It's a good question. I would, play it by ear, I guess. What's your feeling?
Right. Well, I guess you could always say that second story, and then maybe as you finish that answer, you could say, and this was also true in that Target story, if you remember how we talked about that, and then hopefully they could tie both of those together.
Yeah.
So, but thank you for the answer.
It's actually an interesting point in terms of sort of like, don't spill all your candy in the lobby. And, if it's like your best story, the one you're the most proud of, and you've got another story that is good enough to answer the question, then you're probably like a good point, Ben, of, of like not blowing it too soon with your best story.
Or if that star story is would absolutely nail one particular type of question, and then it also works for some other questions, use something else for one of those other questions and save that.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. That's great feedback.
Jump in on that one a little bit. I just from my perspective, when I'm interviewing people, if I feel like if it's too canned that you can't elaborate, you can't say, oh, that's great, that happened, that thing I told you about, well, let me actually go into how that was, you know what I mean? Like, because they're going to ask you something about some other aspect. They're not going to ask you a duplicate question. So if you're too tight about your stories, that they're not organic, then it's been frustrating for me as an interviewer when someone just gives me back the same exact thing they just told me a second ago. And I'm like, all right, you got nothing. You know what I mean?
It's a hollow bunny. You're trying to figure out this.
Did you read
It's a
it?
hollow bunny, and it's like, okay, you know?
Because honestly, I sometimes do ask from different angles to find out, because nothing's cardboard, everything's three-dimensional. So why wouldn't I say, tell me more about that? Like, how did that make you feel? Did you get frustrated with that person? Now I'm asking a question about conflict management. And if you can't pivot, like, I'm going to be like, well, he didn't practice. That didn't really happen, you know, or something.
But see,
Right.
you
But
make
I wasn't thinking so much.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I wasn't thinking so much of pivoting, like where the interviewer might say, well, tell me more about, you know, it sounded like that was a really difficult, you know, relationship situation to overcome with a couple of team members, you know, not getting along. Could you tell me more about that? I was thinking more just, okay, time for a new question. And the question that they ask, you know, would really be best answered by the story you just told, but you don't want to, you know, you don't want to rinse and repeat necessarily.
Well, like most things in life, it's yes and. So, you know, Ramona, to your point, you know, it's what you said, and this is the part that I don't know exactly how to teach, which is that organic and being fluid. And that's why I think if you've got a core group of stories that you really know and that you can kind of cut different ways, you know, again, if it gets you 85% of the way there, congratulations. That's way better than 25% of the way there with your little canned answers. And I don't have one that's exactly that, so I'm screwed, right? You know, versus like, okay, I've thought about this story from the difficult person lens versus my biggest obstacle or a failure or being creative, right? Okay, I can play with that, but it's about preparation. And again, that's what makes the interview not so hard and so stressful, is because I'm prepared.
Well, may I also jump on that? Because sometimes for me, it's hard to think of these. I have trouble promoting myself. I don't know if anybody else in the room relates, but for me, because of my particular personality, I'm very extroverted and I'm very verbal processor. So sometimes it helps to actually get with people and kind of just practice these star stories. Some people are really good at writing in advance and they're much more deliberate. But for me, I feel inspired when I'm in the moment. And so sometimes it's like I have to practice it first, then write it down. So somebody asked in the chat, like, what's a good way to start? And I'm sure there's a million different ways to start, but I really, for me, and what would it hurt for other people? You practice interviewing. Why not practice what those star stories are?
Yes, exactly. So I mean, just kind of what pops in my mind, Yvonne, on, you know, how to start. One is situation, thought process, action, result. Two is, does this story illustrate making money, saving money, mitigating risk?
Exactly.
I mean, those are like two like really straightforward ways. And then I like what you said too, Ramon, about like, you know, life's not cardboard, it's three-dimensional. So it's like, okay, now how do I bring in a collaboration, creative, strategic thinking, my technical skills, something, right? And like, how do I just start filling this out a little bit? Another place to maybe think about is job performance reviews that you've received. What did they say about what you did well, right? I mean, they documented what they thought you did well. And well, we should capture that probably, and maybe use that as the basis of a star story.
Thank you.
Hey, Payne, I just have a quick suggestion on your using the same story for different situation. As I was thinking, if you cannot keep your story straight, that means you are trying to give, but it changes as you are trying to explain the situation, that might put yourself more harm versus bringing in a new story for the new situation.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Hey, Lynn, can we talk about a bad experience?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you mean like tell me about like something that didn't go well, or like a failure kind of a story?
Yeah, you kind of alluded to it, and that always, in other words, we always are prepared. We spend a lot of effort preparing for all of our great stuff. And then, they come at you with typically, tell me about a bad experience that you had, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it tends to be in context. And so I tend to get tripped up, or I've in the past have gotten tripped up, and it might just be an internal thing and they're not, as taken by it as I am. But I guess I just always have a bad experience in my pocket and just have it so prepared. Or what's your best suggestion on managing through that?
As I was thinking about that, because it's something that you need to be prepared for, right? And anticipate, because it's very common. As I was sort of writing all this out, and I'm sure there's a ton of research and a better answer than what I'm getting ready to say, but is like turning into a lesson learned story, right? Than like a bad experience or a failure. I mean, it's very cliche and trite to say there's no failures. There's, the only failure is to not learn or whatever.
Yeah.
Fine. But like the way that I told that Target story, was when I said it as a failure, like I own this. That was my mistake, that we did not have the proper level of contact. And when that person left, I had to eat that loss, and that's a problem, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I could say, and so I lost our biggest account and walk away, say, thank you very much, have a nice night. Or, so what I did was, and here's how I learned. I was thinking about it earlier today too. Like it could be interpersonal skills. Like I remember one time snapping at a colleague, and every time I think about it, I'm embarrassed because that felt really immature. Like, and it really, the way that I made that other person feel has stuck with me this whole time, because it was just bad form on my part. And then you pivot it, right? And so that's why now, like, having a bias towards listening first, asking a clarification question before I just sort of go off because I've got the right answer, which is what I would have done in younger days.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a lesson that's really stuck with me. Again, I'm embarrassed. I'm telling you, I was embarrassed. It wasn't cool. There was nothing good about it. It's not like I worked too hard. That's my biggest problem. And those BS answers. It's like, that's a real answer. It didn't happen last week, so I'm not that guy today. But it's real.
Good thing. Put it further in the past, typically. Sorry. Yeah.
I think, Bob, what you're trying to say, that let's take any weakness and turn it into an opportunity. That what was the lesson learned that you were trying to enforce going forward?
I mean, in a authentic way, right? I mean, people hate it when it's super disingenuous, and again, like my biggest weakness is I care too much and I work too hard and blah blah blah. Everybody wants to throw up and whatever. So not everything is awesome. Not everything turned into awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You're in control of the stories that you tell. They did not press D2 on your jukebox and make you say that. You chose to say that. And if you don't know that there's a happy outcome or some lesson learned that you've been able to regenerate into some kind of a benefit or an asset, why would you tell that story?
Got it. I might just start almost making some bad experiences a star story. In other words,
a bad story can be a star story. A star story can be a bad story.
Yeah.
It goes both ways.
Yeah.
And that's that fluidity, like Ramona was talking about, like being able to pivot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing I found was helpful, a realization was you go in and you're thinking, why can't I've had a bad experience and learn? Well, that's not realistic for anybody. We're all imperfect people. We've all had mistakes that we've all made. So I think, one, they're looking for that genuineness, and two, don't go in there like it's weak, like you should be completely embarrassed, like this, I'm damaged goods forever because I had, and I went in with that attitude once upon a time, and it was really hard. It's like, well, okay, I'm like everybody else. I made mistakes. I own them. I learned from them, and go in with that confidence, because not more than likely, for sure, the person on the other side of the desk has too, because we're all human.
You know, we were talking about Diane earlier today, Natalie, and I think it was she that was telling me about the vulnerability paradox. And it's especially true for men, which is where we are attracted to people who show vulnerability, and we are the most afraid of showing our own vulnerability. So Mark, to your point, right, it's like, look, I'm gonna tell you the truth about something. Like, this is what happened, this is what I did, and what I learned from it, and how I've kind of matured and grown from there, and how it's informed future decisions, right? That's real. And again, I think people want that, and they can smell BS a mile away. And, it's like, again, I think back to like fit, and, why do you think I'd be a great fit here? Like, very high integrity. The way the guy told me that story, and what he kind of, that was pretty personal, the way he kind of explained it, but then it was really cool too. And, oh, by the way, we really value that here. Transparency is a big value for us. And he was transparent. And so, to your point, it's like, it's not something they're going to go, oh my gosh, we hate this guy. It's like, that's why we love him. So, Natalie, I'm trying to be cognizant of the time.
Yeah, it is 8:29. So we promised that we would end at 8:30. So I want to be aware of everybody's time, and everybody has things going on. So I really appreciate everybody's being here. Did we have any last questions? I did say, Bob, that everyone could connect with you on LinkedIn.
Please.
I've had a number of people ask for your slides. Would be okay to share them? Okay. So you can send me those, and we can have Michaela post them tomorrow. We will need to edit the video a little bit, so it probably won't be till tomorrow afternoon until we're able to post it, in case you're looking for it. If you can't find it on our Job Search Central site, you can always email my assistant, Michaela Brungs, and she'll be happy to help you. So that will be great.
Cool.
Or me, myself, which I'm easy to find. All our contact information is right on the Job Search Central site. So.
And Natalie, if anybody wants to do another one of those little pods on another day, like we did before. Okay. I really enjoyed that. So. Oh, good. I'd be happy to do that if there's interest. Okay, good. We will follow up on that. So. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Great. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Great story. Have a great night. Thanks, Bob. Have a good night. Thank you. Thank you.